We have a lot on our agenda today, so I want to dig right in, and I'm just saying there's one guest at the table, and that's Mara Harvey. For those of you who don't know, she is part of our district council team, in addition to Dr. Posse, Dr. Shields, and Javiera, and a community member. So, without further ado.
Good morning. Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the minutes of our past meeting. Those have been approved by the Board of Education. They're there for you as a reference. By way of a personnel update, right now we're focused on hiring teacher aides and also clericals. We're seeing some turnover in those ranks already. So that's two of the areas that we're focused on right now. Item 1.3 is student harassment and bullying prevention and intervention. This is being brought back to the committee because our council has provided some additional updates following the conversation that we had last month. So I will turn it over to the committee.
Ms. Harvey?
Okay. So there was various revisions that we had discussed at the last meeting. One of the main ones is the definitions were moved to the end. So I believe that this policy should reflect the revisions that were spoken about and requested at the last meeting.
I don't have any questions. Any questions or comments from the committee regarding the policy? We'll get to regulation on the exhibits.
Yes.
Policy.
I do have a couple of questions. One small thing that I just noticed in this read and one sort of broader question. In the incident reporting and investigation section, this is just language for clarity. The first sentence reads, being forthcoming with information is crucial for the district to be able to investigate incidents. That makes it sound as though it's crucial for the district to be forthcoming with information about the incidents. So I think if we could just revise that quickly to, it is crucial for those who experience or observe acts of bullying or harassment to be forthcoming with information in order for the district to be able to investigate incidents.
Great.
Can I, but the thing's locked, so I can't make the change in the
Google Doc,
In the
but we
Google
can do
Doc.
that, sure, it
Great.
makes sense. It's
Okay,
great
perfect.
clarification, everybody agree? Yes, no problem.
Great. The bigger question is around dissemination and monitoring. The second, and this is not a question about the change to the policy, but just about how, when it goes back to the board, how we review it as a group. So to that end, the board will receive and review the annual SSEC reports. This is in the context of the Code of Character, Culture, and Conduct. But since that already happened, our process is a little out of order in terms of reviewing this policy, having already done that process. So should we review and receive input from the board on all of this data in order to complete this policy review, in order to know if there are other issues that need to be addressed or remediated through this policy?
Ask that again, please.
So should we, either as a committee first or as a board as a whole, be reviewing all of the data that's required through this review process of the code? Because we did not go through that process with this policy in mind at the time.
Before we establish the policy.
So and it says, based on review of the data, the board may consider further action, including but not limited to modifying this policy. Since we're modifying this policy right now, should we be reviewing that data in this context so that we are able to capture all the necessary revisions?
I understand. So I guess my question would be to Dr. Posse and Dr. Shields, since hopefully one of you is familiar with the data, at least from the end of last year, do you think there is anything in that data that would come to mind that might be appropriate for anything glaring that would cause the board to say additional information or language needs to be put into the policy? And you don't have to answer that question now.
Right.
But
Or anything that should accompany the board's review of this policy when it goes for a first read, if that's the way we.
So at the November policy committee meeting, Dr. Feeney is going to go over the code of conduct, his call for new members to be on the Code of Conduct Committee. And part of their work is to review some of the suspension data and attendance data. And then we had envisioned that that Code of Conduct Committee would synthesize that information, and then we would have a report for the board. Is there anything that looks like requires a change in policy? I think the Code of Conduct Committee should really look at the data and what the data says, and then make a recommendation if that works for this committee.
So my concern is that this policy hasn't been touched since the last century, and I don't mean to be silly about it, but since 1995, and that's a really long time ago. And I'm wondering if maybe we get this on for a first read, get it onto the books, not delay
Right,
bringing this into the 21st century.
right.
And if there is anything then that becomes available to the Code of Conduct Committee or to the board, we can go back in and tweak.
With the understanding that that would be a process for next.
So it doesn't have to wait, so
doesn't
say
have to
the Code of Conduct in November, they start, they get to work fast, in December, they have the material, and they say, oh wait, we have a problem, or we think that, there needs to be a change. It could come back to the policy committee January, it doesn't have to wait until the end of the year. I mean, I think in practice, traditionally, it's gonna be the end of the year, and maybe subsequent years. But I think for this year especially, we kind of be a little bit more aware that if we see something, kind of like if you see something, say something earlier as opposed to waiting till the end of the year.
Is that fair?
Yeah, of course, I just wanted to be sure we had a process in place for this year and this review,
Right.
given that the code was already approved at reorg.
So everybody okay with first read? Okay, Javi, you'll unlock the documents so we can go
Yeah.
in and,
It's all unlocked.
okay, okay, okay. Any questions on the regulation? I know the regulation is really not the purview of the board, but while we're here and it's in front of us. No? The regulation? Oh, yeah. Anything? No. Okay, regulation looks good to go. And then, finally, there are two complaint forms. There's a harassment complaint form itself and the harassment complaint appeal form. And I just wanted to ask counsel, it seemed to me as I was reading through this, that both forms are really geared toward adults, staff members, as opposed to students. And is there a way to either massage this form to have it be friendly to both? Or should there be another form, just something for you to think about?
So I think I could, and I'm looking at now, I just have supervisor, I don't have parent, so I think we need to have, a space where parent and put, where it's applicable. So I think it would make sense to have one form, and I would recommend, so it will be linked to the policy. I also would recommend that we link it to wherever we have information about DASSA on the website, that we link the form so that there's a form. I mean, I think we discussed last time that there is no requirement to have just use this form, so they could write whatever form, but often parents will ask and say, oh, I want a copy of the form, and we do need to do this. So I will make that more applicable for both.
Great, and relationship also could be self.
Right.
I mean, there are some, if there's a student who wants to be self-reporting, I suppose, so. All right, so thank you, she'll take a look at that. Also, I'll just note, the name of the policy is long. It's not the student harassment and bullying prevention policy, it's student harassment and bullying prevention and intervention. So I'm happy to go in there and make that change, just wanted to note it for the record. Any comments about that? Okay, I don't know if you want to run those forms by us again, just kind of offline before they go live.
No problem.
Whatever everybody decides to do, but the policy itself will be on for first read. And I thank everybody who's worked on this policy for the past 2 years, I'd say, to finally get this. Here, okay, great. Dr. Shields, we have student attendance on the agenda because a previous committee member had questions and concerns, and I've written down what I remember to be those questions and concerns that were posted, but I don't know that I feel comfortable speaking for Ms. Alvarez. So if it's okay with the committee, I would like to put this policy off for November. I will absolutely reach out to Ms. Alvarez and make sure that her concerns are made clear to me, so that if she can't attend, I know what to ask as the committee chair. Is that okay with everybody? Yes, okay, so we will put that off. I will check with Ms. Alvarez. Okay, we have,
And just one clarifying comment
Yes.
also, the attendance, the attendance numbers will also be reviewed, the attendance data will also be reviewed by that code of conduct committee.
great,
So just in case there are questions that Ms. Alvarez has regarding the, if it's pertaining to the data, then Dr. Feeney will be able to discuss that with the committee.
great, thank you. This policy was last revised in 2022, and I don't know, she may have questions about the data, so I'll just leave it at that, and I always think it's best for people to speak for themselves,
Yeah.
unless they give me the authority to do it, so.
And attendance is an area that is kind of a hot topic. Newsday's had some articles about attendance. I know I do pins and stuff on various districts, and you know, it is something a lot of districts are kind of looking at and trying to figure out how to help attendance in various different ways, so. It's timely, like, to look at it.
Great, wonderful, glad to hear. Okay,
So the next item on the agenda is policy 4710, grading. It was recommended at a recent board meeting that this policy be brought back to committee for further discussion.
okay, so, some of you don't know that I love to go to the videotape and look at old meetings and just to refresh my memory of what happened there, even though I was there. But this one involves revisiting the very first meeting of this committee regarding creating the grading policy, and that happened in November of '21, so that's almost a full 4 years ago. And at that time, the committee wanted had brought forward, especially the Jericho grading policy that included, well, there was no grading policy at the time, so we really were just trying to figure out what would be the best thing for Port Washington, what should be in the policy, should it be broad, should it be specific? And we looked at several samples, the NISPA sample, the Scarsdale sample, the Jericho sample, and the Jericho sample in particular had as part of board policy weighting. And it was weighting in terms of grades and weighting in terms of quarters, if I remember. And at the time, the committee was very interested in incorporating that into the policy. But Dr. Hines at the time said, let's just create a very broad policy. Let's see if it works. Let's come back, revisit it in a couple of years. And so here we are. So our task now is to decide, what should this policy look like? What are the goals the board goals that we want to make sure are reflected within the policy? And to what level of breadth or specificity do we want the policy to reflect? And so I think it would be a good idea, and I'll ask the committee members and Dr. Posse and Dr. Shields, if today we start with just a global understanding of what do we want to accomplish in this policy, and then how do we go about doing that? So, so I think it's important to clarify, in other words, let's clarify the scope of the current review. We know we want to ensure the policy is meaningful, right? It's gotta mean something. And that it drives our goals of fairness, accuracy, consistency, transparency, alignment and effectiveness while supporting teaching and student learning. Everybody okay with that? All right. So our initial ask then will be, does the current policy, and I have an outline here, just my little script here, because I don't want to forget anything. Does our current policy and do the current grading practices that flow from that policy align with the goals? Do we feel that the policy is fleshed out enough to ensure fairness, accuracy, and those things? And if we feel that the policy is not in alignment with those goals, how do we change the policy to make it align with the goals and to support teaching and student learning? And so with that said, does the policy, the current policy, provide clarity and guidance and procedures to ensure fairness, accuracy, consistency, transparency, alignment, not only across schools, most importantly Weber and Schreiber, and also among the 5 elementary schools, but also among sections within a school. If we have AP Euro, for example, we want to make sure that grading practices, assessment practices are consistent so that one student's experience in terms of grading and assessment in one section is as similar as possible, as consistent as possible in other sections. And that's been a board goal just overall in terms of delivery of instruction in the district.
And I would add sections across buildings as well. So sections of the same course that are delivered in different buildings, Weber and Schreiber.
So for
Specifically.
example, Algebra 1.
Algebra and earth science.
Earth
Space sciences.
science, right,
Art.
And studio art.
okay. And again, we discussed how broad or prescriptive should the policy be. And if we're going to go into detail, to what extent? Should the committee focus on adding grade weighting, quarter weighting a la Jericho? There may be other policies out there that would be instructive, so we don't feel like we're an outlier, even if we said we don't really care what other districts are doing, but maybe there's instructive policy out there that could help us. How are other districts handling Regents exams? Do some or any of these items belong more appropriately in regulation? So these are all topics that I think that would be, and the committee I know agrees with me, would be appropriate to start to delve into in looking at this policy as a start, so.
So if we were to start with your first question about consistency, accuracy, transparency, alignment. So I think that with respect to consistency, the question is how does the board intend to define consistency? So in other words, right now, let me tell you the practice before it was just recently changed, what was happening with Regents exams, just as an example to give you the lay of the land. And this is before the recent changes. So before the recent changes, the English department did not count Regents exams at all in their final grade calculation. Algebra 1 at the high school did not count at all. Algebra 1 at the middle school did count as a fifth, 20%, fifth bucket. Geometry, if you take the course in the Regents level, counts as 20%, but if you took the course with a lab, it did not count. That's the Geometry Plus class. Geometry E&L class did not count. Similar thing for, it looks similar for Algebra 2. With respect to earth science, it counts as 20%.
In which school?
In both. This was before the changes at the high school. With respect to chemistry, both honors and Regents count as 20%. Biology, honors and Regents count as 20%. AP Physics counted as 20%. Now, if you go to social studies, AP Euro and AP World, the exam only counted as 20% of the fourth quarter.
So it wasn't a final grade, it was in the fourth quarter. So we've got a
20% of the-
mishmash. What you're
that's my
saying is
point.
that
And global history regents counted as 20% of the entire course. So if you took the global history exam, if you took the global history course on the regents level, it was 20% of the grade of the entire course. If you took it at the AP level, AP World or AP Euro, 20% of fourth quarter. And the same is true for US history. If you took US history on the regents level, it counted as 20% of the grade. If you took it on the AP level, it counted as 20% of the fourth quarter. So that's why I ask what the board's intention was with respect to consistency. Because consistency within the same sections of the course, sometimes, although not for algebra, because if you took algebra in the middle school, it counted one way than if you took it at the high school. And with respect to transparency, without a uniformed approach to regents exams, the transparency is really dependent upon the teacher communication with their class as compared to the building being able to say in a course catalog, for example, this is how we treat regents exams. Or for us to write on a school profile, this is how we count, this is how we treat regents exams. So the transparency is a little difficult, I would say, unless you were looking at transparency from I'm sure the transparency existed from the teacher to the students. But
Are there
maybe not.
any
interesting,
other,
I'm digesting, go ahead.
another thing, just in terms of consistency, are there any other standardized tests, instruments administered by the state or government, that count in any way in our students' grades as measures of classroom performance?
Well, the only other New York State assessments are the 3 through 8 assessments.
Right.
And 3 through 8 assessments and the NYSESLAT are not, they do not give you a numerical grade that
Right.
can be easily translated into, and it's, and so no. The Regents exams are the only exams that are designed to be cumulative in nature and and many schools use them as their final exams for a particular course.
Do you have AP exams?
We do, but those are not, the scores don't come out
Yeah.
until after exams are done, until after grades are done.
What about flax?
Flax.
Flax is so the
Foreign
New York
language.
State used to give a Regents exam in world language. They discontinued the Regents exam in world language. And so we're a part of a local consortium that creates a Regents exam, that creates a final standardized exam that we do administer.
And does that count in?
It did. It counted as a 5th bucket, but interestingly, teachers also gave a final exam.
Yeah, in some of these classes where Regents exams count as a grade, there's also a final exam there, and
So I think this just speaks to,
I'm sorry?
sorry, I was just gonna say that this all just speaks to the inconsistency across courses, across buildings, in terms of this one particular assessment. But we see it in other areas as well. So for us as a board, where do we go with that?
Well, so this is the history. So now, as you know, as everybody knows, but just to bring it to where we are currently. So the high school has adopted we'll call it a policy since policy belongs to the board, has developed a practice that Regents exams will not count for any student in the high school. So in the high school, the practice is now consistent in that the exams do not count. However, the middle school is still counting Regents exams as 20% of a student's final course grade. So to your point earlier, whoever mentioned the same course earlier, so if you take algebra in the middle school, it counts towards your final course grade, has an impact. If you take it at the high school, it does not. The same is true for earth and space science.
And we
So
are
that's where we
talking
are.
about kids in the same cohort, because there are students who will take algebra in middle school this year, and there are students who, in the same cohort, who will take algebra in the high school next year. So they will be compared to each other with different grading systems.
With different data,
Yeah.
right?
Right, so if the board's intent was consistency in terms of how we treat Regents exams, then there has not been consistency historically, and now an inconsistency still remains.
It's not like consistency, it's fairness, and these have been, they're not, I looked in our vision and mission, I tried to find other places. We have been talking about consistency and fairness for years, actually, every single year that I've been on the board, if not before that. And even though it's not, I can't find it memorialized in a policy, it is definitely a board goal. It has been a board goal for consistency and fairness, transparency. It's like those are, I don't even want to say they're buzzwords, but they are our philosophy, along with equity. And so I'm wondering if we obviously need to do something in our grading policy to at least memorialize those board goals at the very least, that board philosophy. Which unfortunately wasn't done in 2021. It was a type of thing, I remember Dr. Hines saying, this is going to be new for the district, let's just do the best we can now and come back. We'll see where we made our mistakes as a committee, as a board, and we'll try to fix that so that, because we are responsible for this, for governing by this policy, and to make it very clear so that we don't have these unintended negative consequences. So I guess the first step then is to perhaps look at other, well, do you have any other comments, Dr. Posse or Dr. Shields?
Yeah, I would just share that one of the goals of the Professional Growth and Curriculum Committee was to create greater consistency. That's why some of the recommendations are as they are. And it was understood that that was a high school focused committee. But that we needed to now go look at the middle school because we are creating some much greater consistency at the high school. But we realized that there was some inconsistency with the practice at the middle school in the area of science and mathematics. So the expectation was that that would happen next.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll have a more comprehensive, or at least a sounder grading policy to help guide that.
So is that happening now? Has the administration and staff at Weber been brought into that committee to address this inconsistency? How is that?
I wouldn't say that has started yet. There's been much conversation at the board level about this.
Okay,
So if the board is going to be, changing their policy, we would want to make sure that the actions of that committee follow the policy of the board. But we certainly could.
And that includes, whether or not the board wants to take a position on some of these things. In other words, like right now, for example, as I said, the professionals disagree with respect to the counting of Regents exams. You have professionals in one building that have taken the position that Regents exams should not count, and that's the consensus that the committee reached. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was uniformed agreement, as you know, with such a large faculty. Uniformity uniformity in perspective is a difficult thing to reach, but it is the consensus that the committee reached. At the middle school, our understanding is that middle school teachers feel that see value in continuing to count the Regents exams. So a question for the board as we pivot this to the committee, once the board has established a policy, is whether or not the board has a position on the inclusion of Regents exams or not
Well, I
inclusion of
guess
Regents
if-
exams.
I think,
The reason that I say that is because it could end up, and the board would have to be comfortable with this, without taking a position on it, the middle school could follow suit with what the high school has done, which is not count the exams. And if that's not the board's intention, then that should be surfaced.
I mean, conversely, there's also the possibility that the middle school does not follow suit and goes with their own set of beliefs and recommendations. Is that a
Well,
possibility?
if the board leaves the policy the way that it currently is, then yes, because the interpretation of this policy has been, as I've shared with you, that, that each course in each building has made decisions for their course and their building.
Right.
so if we add consistency here, that will change that outcome.
Yeah, where either the middle school will follow suit with what the high school has done and not count the exams, or the high school will be asked to look at what the middle school is doing. But since the high school has reached consistency, the possibility of the middle school following that approach is I think a possibility that could happen absent clear language. So the board has to make a decision as to whether or not they want to take a position on that particular matter, or if they want to leave the question of consistency of what it looks like, whether we're counting it or not counting it, up to the buildings to decide, up to the.
I guess
Buildings
my
to decide.
question is, if the board did decide to strengthen the language around consistency, that would be the natural outcome of that the middle school would follow suit.
Possibly, unless
Or the
they
high
convince
school.
the
Or the high
Absolutely.
school would follow the middle school, but either way, right?
Yes.
And we would be relying on the expertise and professional judgment of our educators.
So if you look at the policy, the current policy, it allows for the difference between the middle school and the high school. Because if you look at the second paragraph, the first sentence, it says we use 3 grading system, one for elementary, one for middle, and then one for high school. So, it is possible, and obviously elementary is very different, than middle school or high school, with just one sentence change. If the board's desire is to make sure that the middle school and the high school are the same, there would be 2 systems, not
Right.
3.
But there are other
But there are
elements of
other
the grading
elements of
policy.
grading
There are
policy
honors
too.
courses that,
Right,
there's.
right.
So it also, you could keep it the same way, and it could be, a sentence that with regard to the regents, it has to be all the same, like,
Right,
it could
that's-
be that there could be differences, but in that particular case, that the board would like to see it treated the same.
It's
And,
really a
you know-
high school course taught in.
Right,
Yes.
Right. It's
And that's where I think
consistency
you
across
raised the good
courses.
point is,
Right.
That's.
It's not the
that's-
building, it's about the
Right.
courses.
Correct.
and that's, you raised a very good point in that if, my son took it in 8th grade, the regents would count, and his friends who didn't take it in 8th grade, took it in 9th grade, you're looking at the same people are being compared, but they weren't
Correct.
treated the same.
Right. I mean, to my mind, this question of the language around consistency is bigger than just the regents, right? Like when we're talking about consistency across courses, it's about our assessment strategy.
Yes. Yes.
So I think it begs bigger questions than just this one, which we can tackle
That's an easy one
to
to tackle.
support the students who are taking these courses right now, right? I think that's where my head is. Are we addressing the immediate concern of the students right now who are taking courses that are being treated differently?
Definitely.
Which is one course right now, right? Two, because of earth science. And math, but earth science was always consistent. Now it has become inconsistent.
Right.
Right. So we need to address that issue to support those students in some way, while also perhaps exploring the bigger issues around assessment strategy and consistency.
So so to that point, consistency is a lot more than just this question of a regents exam.
Yep.
So it really, it goes into greater detail across a number of topics.
And that's just the consistency part of it, there's also the fairness part of it, that, when my mind think, and I've said this at a public board meeting, and parents certainly have said it in June at the curriculum committee meeting, that when you change a grading, practice in the middle of a cohort, the colleges, I mean, I heard this and I said, okay, the colleges aren't concerned, they'll see that the practice changed on the school profile. So my concern is now not with the colleges, my concern is about the students within the same cohort who are being graded one way last year and they're being graded a different way this year. Now I'm talking about the weighting, where the weighting, and this only goes to GPA really, and where the weighting last year was more weighty and the weighting this year is less weighty for the same courses where you have two friends, right, in the you understand what I'm saying? In the same cohort, one who takes a particular course last year, got their 0.5, friend is now taking it this year and is getting 0.3, their GP, we're not comparing apples to apples. And to me, that's a fairness issue. And so I think somewhere in here, we have to also really ensure that we incorporate the fairness issue as well as the consistency issue, among other things. And fairness also goes to how many assessments is student A being given in one section of AP. I don't wanna pick on AP Euro, but it's notoriously a difficult class. AP, in this section of AP Euro, and I know this because this was my child's experience, was getting assessments all the time, and in another AP Euro cohort, it's like, maybe, I don't even know when my next test is, because we're not being given one, and so they're being graded differently because of the different number of assessments and the different types of assessments, so that's consistency, but it's also a fairness issue. So I think we have a lot of things to think about.
Yeah, and right now, the policy doesn't speak to weighting at all.
Correct.
So, so because of that, it's left to it's left to the building to work through with their staff, which is what they've done, in terms of changing the weighting and changing the way in which it's implemented. Determining the timeline in which it's implemented.
So the word fair is just making me bristle. I don't know if it sounds like there's intent, and I'm asking the lawyer at the table.
That's the designated paid lawyer
at the table. Help me get to a different use of language that doesn't make it sound malicious. Like I want it, how can we express that where we're talking about students being evaluated? I think it's still consistency.
I was just saying, I think it's still consistency.
Consistency is still fair.
Yes.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Because, the example, and I think it is good, it's like the fairness, like, so you have one person who's in this AP class that has 5 tests that counts as 20% of his grade, and this person has 3 tests. Well, now, the kid may have been really excited, they only had to study 3 times, but if they don't do good on 1 test, it's a harder to bounce back from when you have 5. So it's fairness, but it comes down to its consistency.
And to be fair, we have many other students that are not AP students.
Yes.
I'd like
and
to
it's the
talk
same
about the
thing-
region students,
Yeah,
I'd like to
it's
talk
It's
about
still
all of them.
I don't know what,
Same principles.
Yeah.
Same principle.
Yeah.
And it also affects the student's course load. When you have one student who is consistently taking tests, it impacts, it can negatively impact other coursework. And you have another student who isn't as, I'll say, burdened with assessments all the time. It's just a different, it's different for the mental health issue. And I'm talking about the same coursework. I'm
and
trying to compare apples to apples.
it definitely happens. I know for my own son, he came home and was all upset because he was gonna lose points from his band class. I'm like, how are you gonna lose points in your band class? He said, because I couldn't go to my lessons because I had tests. And so I reached out to the teacher, I was like, if he has a test, he can't go to the lesson, is there a makeup, like, where is the makeup? Like, I get it, this is a class also he has to go to, and he was like, well, he has to come, and I think he didn't I think he didn't believe him that he had tests, and I was like, look, I happen to know I was helping him yesterday. And we did come up with makeup, because he didn't have enough time in his schedule, so we went before school. But in that case, he couldn't go to the lesson because he had more tests in his exam, so he was gonna get hurt in the other class, and we fixed it, but not every parent is.
And the
on top
goal
of it
should
that
always
way.
be, and the
Right.
goal should always be to do no harm,
Yes.
right? Like, it should just,
And this teacher was a new teacher, like
I think this,
Didn't fully
so
think
our
it.
conversation sort of fundamentally also touches on something that's missing from this grading policy, which is a real statement of this board's philosophical view of the purpose of grades and grading, right? Because grades have intrinsic value and extrinsic value. They have intrinsic value to the student as a communication tool for where they're, where they have strengths, where they need improvement. And there's an extrinsic value to, let's call it third parties or the market, right? To teachers, to tell them, give them information about perhaps gaps in their instruction, to give college admissions officers comparable, valid, accurate information about this student and their profile. So when you think about that in terms of the comparability of student grades, I think we're missing a lot of that in this policy, and that would then guide the alignment to board goals and some of the systems that would naturally follow.
exactly, well said.
So to that point, that second sentence,
Where are you
so
looking,
the second
sentence of what?
sentence of the grading,
Of our current
first
policy?
paragraph. I've been wanting to look at that second sentence because evaluating students, to your point, it's much broader than
Much
that.
bigger than that.
Right.
Yeah, so we need to flesh out, at the very least, flesh out the board's philosophy, which, these are things we have learned along the way. Right, that we're deficient in this policy, but that's why we exist, so.
And I guess this is a question for the administration. Something that would be helpful to me as a trustee in assessing where we go from here with this policy, what the next steps are, and what issues the policy really needs to be refined to address. Are things like the data, Dr. Passy, that you just shared with us about the inconsistent historical approaches to Regents grading. I have never seen any kind of audit of our grading practices and policies across courses, sections, buildings, grade levels in the case of elementary. And I think we lack a fundamental understanding of what the problems truly are, right? Like, we hear a lot about grade inflation. There may be grade inflation, there may be systemic grade inflation, in which case the question is, so what? Like, if all the kids' grades are inflated, then okay. But if it's a course to course or cohort to cohort, that's a different problem that needs to be addressed.
Can we define grade inflation?
I'm not even ready to define it. I think it's just a term. I think that the data will help us
Nationally, grades are inflated from the 80s, according to research, that we no longer have our students, our average students are no longer Cs. That is just no longer the case.
So we're giving higher grades to students who haven't earned them, that's what grade inflation is, as opposed to
That's how I understand
how
it,
much
but-
an honors course counts? I'm
Yes,
trying,
yes.
that's
Yes,
it, okay.
Yes.
It's like vanity sizing.
Yeah.
When you go shopping, you buy a smaller
Still a
size,
six. I
even
don't
though
know
you're
how
still
I'm still
whatever.
a six.
But anyway, I think I don't need to define it right now. I would actually look to our educators and our administrators to define what grade inflation is and if it does exist in our district, where it resides. But that would be very, very helpful to me in kind of targeting a review and revision of this policy, if that's what we are going to do. Again, if we're just going to address 3 words in order to change a specific practice for 2 courses in 2 buildings, that's a different discussion. But if we're really gonna dig into this in pursuit of consistency and comparability and meaningful grades,
To go back though, I think once we add consistency, it is well beyond those 2 courses.
agree.
I
Well,
think,
in the second paragraph, the second sentence, you do have the word It's how it's phrased.
It's how it's phrased and also how it's defined, like, there's no definition. I think we were kind of going back to the better word for fairness. There's other things that are inconsistency.
So we have to define what we mean by consistency. We have to say in terms of numbers of assessments per quarter, perhaps, or, other detailed ways of describing what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, and the way to tackle that would probably be to, through the policy, direct the administration to develop regulations.
Right.
Through, so that there's a through line between teachers who are teaching the same course in terms of
Right.
similar number of, you'll
You
never.
never have exact.
Exact is a very difficult thing
Right.
to achieve, but similar is something that should be able to be achieved in terms of a range. But the question of grade inflation is typically, what practices, if any, are impacting a student's grade beyond grades that they've earned on tests and quizzes, so or for completion of work. So for example, extra credit, participation grades, things that are a little bit more subjective. There's certainly room for those types of measures. The question is,
The art versus the science.
yeah, and the question is really, is it consistent from teacher to teacher who's teaching the same course? So that your grade is not dependent simply upon the geography of which classroom you ended up in, that there's some consistency, there. So I think we can achieve that through a regulation, by, we would ask the principal to work with the departments and develop those regulations in a collaborative way.
Okay, so I think we have a basic framework. I think it would be helpful to have some sample policies brought to the table for us, so we can look at them and try not to reinvent the wheel on our own. I know there are policies out there that obviously address weighting and quarter weighting and grade weighting and so forth and so on. And Dr. Posse, if you have policies you would like to bring Dr. Shields,
I could look and see if I have some policies as well.
Ms. Harvey, that would be great. That are not just the NISPA sample,
Right.
but
Yeah, that one's
where the
terrible.
board has really deliberated and fleshed out, delved into other issues, then we could look and see, we like it, we don't like it, but at least we have it in front of us.
I think the position NISBA's policy kind of took was, I'm gonna do kind of just a basic framework, and that the nuts and bolts are more gonna be in, a policy, in a regulation, or practices in the building that align with this flighty policy.
Now, you had an ask though, of the administration coming back with
With
data
data.
for the board.
to help us review this policy. And I would also ask this committee, are we asking the administration to go back to PGCD, to Dr. Shields' point much earlier in the conversation, to review the recommended changes that have been implemented at Schreiber, with input from Weber, to see if that committee is going to align on a common approach before we.
The only
I
thing I
think
would
it goes
ask
the
of
other
you is if the board wants, I'm not sure if the board has a position on the question of the inclusion of Regents exams or not. If the board has no position on that matter, then we could do that, but it would probably behoove us to see what the scope of the policy is, and then there's going to be work, I'm sure that's going to require, that's gonna stem from that, that's gonna require participation from our teachers and our administrators.
Yeah, I feel like it's a chicken egg thing because before the board can make, I wanna say an intelligent, informed decision about this, we need information. Some of us have experienced it with our children, some haven't.
Yeah.
Some have experienced it themselves as parents, but not in this era.
Yeah, I was
So-
separating the data question from the alignment between the middle school and high school question.
Are you asking if the board has a specific sort of agreed upon collective view on the actual practice regarding it that is being implemented at Schreiber?
Yeah,
That
well,
was-
in other words, right now, the professionals in both of the buildings
Right.
disagree. And so we can either have them work that out and come to an agreement. However, if the board has a position on the inclusion of Regents exams, then we shouldn't let them
If the board's
flounder there.
position is one of consistency and an interest in respecting the recommendation of our teachers and their professional expertise, then to me, that would require the PGCD go back with input from Whipper and figure it out on their own to come up with a consistent approach. But if we as a board have a specific point of view on the actual practice, then that is what you're saying requires.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because otherwise,
So
the
I think we
possibility
need
is-
to talk to the rest of the board
Yes.
at the next meeting
Yes.
about whether we are aiming for consistency as a rule or for a specific practice to be made consistent.
Right, and so, cause I,
Say that.
no,
Just trying to figure out like what exactly we're going to ask the rest of the board.
no, because Dr.
Next month.
Pasi, I wrote down, we said, does the board have a position on inclusion of Regents exams? And I was thinking, in order for us to formulate an opinion, we need to be, it needs to be an informed opinion, not just this knee-jerk thing. Which is why I was knee-jerk in terms of not having information prior to making the opinion.
Understood.
So that's why I was saying if there are other school districts that have specificity about Regents exams in their policies, that would be helpful to at least start to say, okay, this could be our lane. This is, other boards have taken this approach, this actually could be our lane. And maybe try to find out now from the administration, the pros and the cons. Are there students who are hurt by not having the Regents exams included? Are there students who are helped? Are there in other words, how many of each? If we had to do no harm, because the Regents themselves are talking about doing away with Regents exams. So we may be talking about just a couple more years of this, but it still impacts students now, right? So that's why I'm mindful of this issue now, where we say, okay, do Regents exams count? Do they not count? If they count, then do we have a do no harm? Like, there are different permutations to this question. It's not just do they count, but are we gonna have them count with do no harm? To me, there's a lot to tease out before the board can actually have a position. And that's why I said it's chicken egg, so maybe and I don't know where to start, I don't know if we start with, I don't wanna throw Weber and Schreiber into chaos by saying, go ahead, make it consistent now, but we may change it down the road. But I don't know the right answer, because there are students who are impacted either way.
The question is, what do we do? I think the question is, what do we do in these intervening 2 years to make sure that students are not harmed?
That's what I said, do no harm. I see Dr. Feeney, yes.
I just want to clarify, there is, I don't think there's any expectation that the Regents are going to go away. What will go away in a few years is the Regents as a graduation requirement. So students are not required to demonstrate proficiency or mastery through the Regents exams. They can continue to do so, but it's no longer a requirement. I anticipate that across New York State, in Port Washington, Regents will continue to be administered. Teachers will continue to get them. Most students will continue to take them because it's an easy way for a lot of students to check off, if you recall the Blue Ribbon Commission presentation we did last year, check off some of those, areas of proficiency one needs to. It's just that Regents will no longer prevent kids from graduating. If you don't demonstrate proficiency through a Regents, there's another pathway to do so.
I
Just,
see. Thank you for that clarification.
it's an important
It's
clarification.
very important.
Yes.
So the exams will continue to exist, just not as a graduation requirement.
Correct.
It will not be a hurdle that will prevent any student from, they themselves will not be a hurdle to prevent a student from graduating.
There are other pathways. Right now, you have to pass the English Regents. You can't give a presentation to demonstrate English proficiency, so on and so forth, right? That is the pathway. With the Blue Ribbon Commission measures that New York State has adopted, there will be other ways to demonstrate, the communication proficiency, research, whatever it might be.
So then this is much
Just
more
muddy the
long-term.
water.
It's more long-term.
That's why, especially when you
long-term.
said the 2 years. No.
Not
It's
so.
more long-term.
I
Okay.
retract.
It is more long-term, but it's not, because right now, Regents, it's kind of, you have to
You
take
have
them.
to take them.
At that point, when it gets to a point, if it does get to the point that you don't have to take, there's a question, with regard, if you say, okay, well, Regents are 20% of the grade, but you don't have to take the Regents, it'd have to be, there may have to be a switch or a change
Right.
to take into what is the actual
Right.
landscape of education at the time, which is fine. I mean, look, changing policies or changing things when there's a change in law or change in practice
Right.
is what you wanna see.
Yeah.
So, do we need to get a sense of the board on how we as a board want to address this fundamental question? Because I am not personally 1,000% convinced right now that it is within our lane to answer the question, to say, we reject this particular practice within a particular grading system, and we are going to enshrine that in district policy. I would need a lot, I would need more insight into this to determine if that was even within our lane, because right now I'm not convinced it is. It is most certainly within our lane to say that we will have consistent uniform approaches to grading, particularly with course alikes or whatever we're gonna call them. I am 1,000% confident that that is within our lane. So do we need a sense of the board to further this conversation?
I think we do, before we go down a path as a committee that the board as a whole is going to reject. But I also think we need to give the board information, this is the cycle. That's why I said to show policies from other school districts, hopefully comparable school districts, to see if what they say, to determine, well, did they go out of their lane, are they in their lane, is it right for Port Washington? And to have more information presented to the full board as to, and we're just talking right now, we kind of we went down the rabbit hole with Regents exams, but it could be the same thing for weighting with respect to quarters, or weighting, because which Jericho did in their policy, weighting with respect to grades, which is enshrined, for example, in Jericho, and I believe in other school districts, so that's why I'm looking for guidance here. I don't know which one comes first. Obviously, I think we need to understand, and Dr. Posse, in order to answer your question as to whether you asked, does the board have a position on inclusion of Regents exams, we first need to know, is it in our lane? If other districts have done it, did they go outside of their lane, which is also a possibility?
Is that a question for the lawyer?
So, yeah, I mean,
That's great.
definitely it's something that, so, and that's another thing, we're looking at it as like elementary, middle, and high school. I think there's another option is, we were talking about the algebra, that's really a high school class.
Yeah.
So the board could decide, we want consistency amongst the class. So just because this class is sitting in the middle school, it should be treated the same whether you take it in the middle school or in the high school. So that would be, I mean, if the board decides, I wanna keep it, like, the middle school, they're different, there's different different ages, they're different than high school, although there's similarities. There's a way to kind of rectify the inconsistency of the two people without, a complete upheaval. With regard to, the decision of, regions, we want them to keep a certain way. I mean, I think with information provided, you can make a determination of what the board feels like. I think it would be ill-advised to come in and say, I don't really know why, I just feel like regions should not count.
That's what I'm saying. We need
So I
to
think
make
we
an
need to have
informed-
more information to get a point, to have a decision. I think to come in with no information and just say, I don't like, I remember when I took Regents, I hate Regents, I don't want kids to, have to worry about Regences. That would probably, not be your lane, just to do something because you don't like it. But if you have, usually when, as a board, you are listening to the professionals and coming up with, okay, now we're gonna make rules with listening to the professionals.
And as a precedent, what precedent does that set for the way we as a board interact with any other school or building specific practice,
And I
reading
also-
practice or
Yeah,
otherwise?
and I also think that a lot of that would end up being in the regulation, where it would be the superintendent's regulation. You would give kind of your feedback of what you would like to see, kind of like we said, we looked at it to see if there's any feedback. You would look at it to say, oh, we don't necessarily agree with this, and then the discussion, would be there. So it's really more would be coming, from the superintendent with the advice of the board, but I would also want to see the advice of the professionals and the
Yes.
superintendent.
So I keep going back to the same question, I'm not sure, I'm stuck on it. If we are talking about consistency, I feel like that gets to the question of, if it's a consistent course, the assessments have to be similar. So it will instantly require that Weber and Schreiber wind up on the same page. What page is another question, right?
Yeah.
So do we leave that piece to the professionals to, that's my instinct, but I'm
Yes.
not.
That's the question that
Yeah.
Dr. Posse is asking us, do we have a position? And I think our position either can be decided here as a committee, we think it's best to leave those particulars in terms of how grades happen, to the professionals in the building. Or we decide, no, we want to tell them how we feel. But it has to be based on, I think the full board really needs to make that determination. And I think the only way we can make it is to have information on which to base that opinion. And so I'm still going the chicken egg thing, I'm trying to do the process, I'm really trying to find a critical path forward and figure out what that critical path should be. And I think we can look at other districts and their policies. I'm thinking out loud, perhaps look at what other districts have done in their policies, see if what they have done with respect to the particulars resonate with us. And if something resonates with us, then perhaps we have administration come back and say why this would be a good idea, why this wouldn't be a good idea. With the data, as opposed to having administration go out and get the data now, and then we may look at a policy and say, no, we don't like this, so we're just not going to include it. Maybe there's something in a written policy that will help guide us, and then we can go further. Because I don't want to make our administrators do work that is not necessary, right? So I'm trying to find, I really am asking for everybody's help here. What is the critical path forward in meshing all of these things efficiently and effectively? In terms of staff time and in terms of making this an effective policy. So I don't know the answer.
I mean, I would be inclined to have the board inform this committee's work so that we're not going down a rabbit hole that ultimately gets rejected, as you said before, when we put it before them on first read. So, I think hopefully other board members either are watching now or will watch the video after this meeting. I'm sure they will have perspectives on this issue. Personally for me, I'm not sure I need all of that information about other districts' policies to make the determination about how I feel with respect to the question of, are we broadly prescribing consistency, or are we issuing specific practice in the policy itself? I see why other districts do that. I can understand that from a process perspective, that if there's any revision to the grading system, it then has to go through board policy. So that would have been a different process for what we experienced over the last year. I think there are other ways to address that through policy if what we're looking for is more direct oversight of the process of changing grading systems and practices. I personally don't know that I need all of that to determine this. So do we as a committee bring a recommendation to the board? It sounds like you need some more information before you're comfortable getting to that point. So could we have everybody provide input into this and next steps? I think we can. And I think it would be helpful, because if uniformly everybody says, we don't need all that information, we're comfortable with X approach, or we want Y approach, then we have our marching orders. Then we know what other information we need to solicit in order to make specific revisions to this policy.
And so your recommendation or your suggestion to the two of us is what?
Is if we do not have a sort of an aligned recommendation to make to the board in terms of what we think this policy requires in terms of immediate revision, in terms of answering Dr. Posse's kind of two-pronged question, then we should go to the board and solicit their input into that question, so that we can come back here and then at the very least have a sense of the board, meet hopefully a consensus to work within reviewing the policy and asking for additional inputs. So
I
yes.
like the idea of approaching the board in general, but I go back to how are any of us supposed to make that determination without information?
I mean, I think, I won't speak for anybody else on the board, but I know that some have a clear sense of what the board's lane is and what the board's lane isn't, and I expect we will see some of that in
Okay.
conversation. But if you, I don't know if there are a handful of policies that would be helpful in just sort of laying the groundwork and for us to see how have different districts addressed these questions through policy. I don't know that we're gonna get input on, are they in their lane, are they not in their lane, was this right, was this not right, right? Like, I think we will be left to our own judgment on that, which lands us in the same spot we were in the beginning. But yes, would that be helpful to understand the different approaches? Sure.
Okay, so,
Can I
yes,
share with you that there are some districts that are very prescriptive. There are some districts that are the far other end of the spectrum. You're gonna find some great variation in between. So I'm not sure that's going to guide you. I think I would encourage you to think philosophically, where do you land as a board? You have always taken the approach that we keep policy at a very high level, and it's about philosophy. What do we want to impart to our community and what we value? So I think that if you're going to continue with that philosophy, then it's looking at this type of tone that you established when you set up this policy in 2022. If you're going to take a hard right turn and change your thinking, at least on this one policy, then that's a different kind of conversation around what this policy should look like.
and that requires that we be consistent. So I greatly appreciate that perspective. So that having been said, I am comfortable, you made me think, and I appreciate that. I am comfortable keeping it at a a more global philosophical perspective, but strengthening the language in the policy to make that perspective clear or more clear. And so that said, I think I'm aligned with you. Am I aligned with you, or are we sufficiently aligned?
I honestly don't know where you guys are aligned.
So I think, Deb, are you asking for our perspectives on Dr. Passey's question, which is, are we focused on strengthening the language around consistency to the extent that it supports our board's philosophy
Yes.
and our goals?
Yes,
Or are we,
and provides guidelines,
and
provides sufficient guidelines.
and provides sufficient
And procedures.
guidance
and-
for developing practice, right? Or are we going to answer the question of should regents count one way or another? Are you asking for our views on that?
Yes,
Okay.
sure.
So my view is that we should stay, as you just said, global to strengthen the language around consistency to the extent that it supports our philosophy and our board goals, which would then necessitate going back to PGCD and asking Weber and Schreiber to align in one way or another on practice.
And would we see that come through as regulation? Or how does that land after that work?
Yeah, I think once, I think that would be in a regulation. And it would be developed through regulation. So the process is exactly what Ms. Malani just articulated. We would convene the PGCD. We would ask them to include the middle school reps most likely include them in the committee that is already existing, and have a conversation about alignment between the two buildings as it relates to the question of Regents exams, and then see what their recommendation is.
Would it be specifically Regents exams, or when, as I keep saying, if we bring in consistency, I think it takes us down a lot of other lanes.
Well, to answer this particular question is about Regents exams. I think the other question about, how many assessments and how much are we counting tests, what percentage is that uniformed for teachers that are teaching the same course? I think that's a much bigger conversation that would require regulations as well, which would be developed through the same process. It would be a process collaboratively between the teachers and administrators to determine what that looks like, and it would live in regulation.
And could that conversation happen at the board's request? I mean, how would that conversation come up? Would that be an organic kind of, the PGCD says, okay, we want to take this on in light of the changes that are being made to policy? Or would it be vice versa, that the board requests?
So we could put it into the policy that we want regulations created.
Yes.
And that would be the likely way that we go about to get what the meat of the regulations would be.
And that's done through central office and then / PGCD, so it all just
And again,
happens.
and so how you would put a statement, you see in some policies saying, we direct,
Or the superintendent's
and that you traditionally on types of policies, that it is like the big picture, the broader picture is in the policy and the details are in the regulation. And that seems kind of sometimes counterproductive, intuitive. You would think, the policy, you read it, and I kind of know how everything does. Usually the policy is more big picture, broad,
Philosophical.
and philosophical, and the regulations is where the meat and potatoes are.
And so would that also include, for example, when we talk about consistency, getting homework or assignments or tests back in a timely manner? Like, is that also part of that? Because there's so many different aspects to grading, to supporting student learning and teaching as well. I guess, would that live in regulation, or could there be something broad in policy about, we believe that tests should be meaningful, assessments should be meaningful, homework should be meaningful, which is actually in the homework policy, that things should be returned on a timely basis so students can benefit and learn. Does that live in policy?
Well, I think that would be, because that's
As a
part of, that's
philosophy?
part of like kind of defining what consistency is. So it would be that there's consistency, and when I say defining it, I think it's using, right, it's not an exhaustive list, it's like examples. Because you're never gonna be able to get an exhaustive list of everything, so it could be, you know, including but not limited to frequency of tests. You know, and kind of the different types of things that we wanna see that there's some consistency. You know, a lot of the things that we were talking about really in the middle school, high school, but you know, with elementary, there's also, you know, the same kind of thing, like, you know, homework, you know, there is a policy, but there is also some level of consistency. I know, you know, from my own experience with, you know, teachers, like in 5th grade, my kids had 2 different teachers. One, you know, they had more tests, and the other one, it was, no, you know, he didn't have tests.
So to your point, Dr. Shields, this conversation is sounding to me like we're back to where you had said, which perhaps we're, with your suggestion, looking at samples and doing the global philosophical policy and using, as you said, not reinventing the wheel. So perhaps there's some favorites or some of them that look aligned. Is that where we're headed?
Yes, I think we should have a wide swath. We have fresh eyes now, several years later. And so I will look at anything that anybody wants to share and consider it.
Well, I think, and that would be part of the natural review process
Yes,
of any policy. I think immediate next steps, what I'm hearing is that if we are all aligned on the overarching strategy, which is to stick with the board's philosophy on policy creation to date, to stay global, to strengthen the language to ensure our policy is meeting board goals and district philosophy on this particular issue. And in our report back to the board on this committee meeting, to get a sense of, is that the direction
okay with that.
that they want to head with this policy?
Yes.
Our process is going to be to review sample policies from other districts to sort of get the best of all possible worlds, and develop a policy with those goals in mind.
Yes.
Is that where we're headed?
Yes, you're hired.
Great.
Good.
Is Dr. Pasi and
that-
Dr. Shields, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we have time for community comments. Any community comments from administrators? We did first dibs. Any community comments from the community? Okay,
Trying to think about the most useful response. I guess thank you for this conversation. It was really helpful to hear about the different layers and how these decisions are being made and where things exist. And I guess as a parent, my concern is still my kids who are caught in the middle. And I think my main question remains, what were the goals of these grade changes, these grading policy changes? I still do not understand what they were and whether they align to them or whether they are consistent with your goals, which that was also really helpful to understand this committee's goals, which I think are fantastic and align with everything I hope for in a district. I don't understand how these grading policy changes align with those goals. And my thought, which I didn't hear on the table, I'd just like to add this. One possible thing is that these grading policy changes have not actually been enacted yet.
do you mean the practices, the grading practices as opposed to the district's policy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The high school grading changes that were suggested that roll out this year, they have not actually changed for our children yet. And so I think one additional possibility that I would hope you would consider is to pause that. And when you go back to the committee and ask them to align with the middle school, to reconsider with an understanding communicated to the community, what the goals are, what the intentions are, and how each of these changes do the job of fixing what we think is broken. Until then, my kid is stuck in the middle, and that took 8 years. And I don't wanna wait another, my kid will be in college in the next 8 years.
And you say stuck in the middle in terms of doesn't know which system is being used or the system
Can I
is
just-
changing?
Can
I just wanna make sure I understand.
Yeah, can I jump in there, because I think I feel very similar.
Yeah.
So you're talking about making changes, right, in the grading system, however, and we're talking a lot about consistency. But we're also saying, we don't know where we're going, right? We're going down a path, we're picking a lane, we don't know what path or lane, but we're gonna make these changes, but we haven't aligned or set our path yet. It seems kind of strange to put something into motion on one end when we are not clear of if the buildings are gonna align, and I'm a big believer in looking at what your neighbor's doing. I mean, luckily, you know, what was Manhasset doing? Were they successful? Looking at Jericho, I think that's really important, you know, to do that. So until we have a master plan and we know our lane, like, it just seems a little strange. We've already made some changes, and again, our kids, like, you know, my son took the Regents early for the earth science, and that was a debacle, and we all agreed upon that. Like, I feel like these kids, if we're talking about consistency, they're going through a lot of changes because we don't have any clear path yet. Was that
I think
kinda?
yes, and I'm not yet convinced that the changes are better than what we had before.
Absolutely, I agree.
And until we understand why we're making these changes, it feels like there's potential harm. There's certainly, we don't have a perfect system. The old system is not perfect. We definitely agree on that. I'm not convinced the new system is better for the reasons that you all discussed as your goal for policy.
So there's a sense of limbo then?
Yeah.
Dr. Posse, do you have any response as what is the status of the changes that were discussed back in June and addressed to the curriculum committee then? Where are those proposed changes now? I know some of them have been tweaked.
Yeah.
But where are they now in terms of implementation? I'm not asking for a particular substance, but in terms of implementation, is it still moving forward, I
Yeah.
think is the question.
Yes.
And while we are making revisions to the policy, does it make sense, I think I'm hearing, does it make sense to have it move forward, to have the implementation move forward before the policy is finalized?
So,
Is that kind of?
Yes, that's.
Also because the
Very
kids
good.
will have two the sophomores and juniors under the current policy are going to have two different systems. And so that's part of the kids caught in the middle thing, is that, as you discussed earlier too, about two different.
so
Well, the other-
the changes that were, the changes that were announced, and we put out an FAQ on it, and Dr. Bear put out a graphic. Those changes are consistent with the existing policy. They're in alignment with what the board's existing policy says. So, you know, those changes have been agreed to, they've been articulated, they've been communicated. So those are in process. If the board changes its policy, then it necessitates going back and making sure that the work still aligns with what the board's policy is. That's why I was asking the particular question that I was asking, was to not frustrate the board in terms of, you know, being open. Are you open to the possibility that the middle school adopts the high school's practice? And if not, then that should be clearly said, because then, you know, we would adopt, whatever we adopt will be consistent with the board's policy. But right now it is. So we are
So
moving
should
forward
this
with
wind
that.
up
As
getting
is.
modified and adopted, that would necessitate
Yeah.
Perhaps
A
not a
review.
change.
Possibly, depending on what,
Right, some aspects of it may change, some may
Depends,
not, right?
yes,
And there
that's
are
right.
pieces of the plan that are not slated for implementation until next school
That's right.
year, so.
the only thing for this year is adding unweighted GPA to transcripts. The Regents exams are excluded from final grades at the high school this year. Local finals count in quarter 2 or quarter 4. And courses dropped will simply appear with a W instead of those other coded grades that they had before. So that's what's implemented this year. I think the only thing that's caused controversy of what's been implemented this year is the Regents and Flax scores being excluded. The unweighted GPA, while I know that that is new to Port Washington, that's a widely accepted practice, that unweighted GPAs show up on transcripts. So,
But it still affects the cohorts, right? Because of the different.
well, the weighting doesn't change until September 26th, in accordance with the way in which this has been outlined. So again, if
So that could be paused. That's actually kind of paused now because it's
Paused
not
now.
happening really.
that's right.
And so on that, it would be the weighted and the unweighted would be on the transcript then,
Well,
correct?
that's happening as of
As of
this
this
school
year,
year.
yes.
But the actual change to the way in which courses are weighted
Weighted
doesn't
isn't
happen
until
until September 2026.
But to be clear, I mean, barring the board going into this policy and enshrining the current weighting in the policy,
That's right,
that change would not be prevented from
that's right.
going on. There would have to be a very specific change to the policy in order to stop any of these changes, is what I'm hearing.
Well, but consistency is important. And so if we're looking at consistency within a cohort and we're changing the grading, in other words, if we're not changing the grading practices beginning in 9th grade so that all 9th graders and all 10th graders and all 11th graders and all 12th graders are graded with the same practices, then we're not being consistent, because if we have, it goes back to what I said at the beginning and what other parents have been saying is their concern, and I believe rightfully so, that when you have students taking, in the same cohort, taking the same classes but in different years, now they're going to be graded differently. There is no, that lacks consistency. To me, that's a piece of it. And that's just about implementation. That's just about saying, let's just
Well-
wait till the incoming 9th grade class.
Understood, but the issue then is that you have students in 2 different grades taking the same course, getting different weighting. So in other words, Chris and I could be sitting next to each other, but because he's a year older than I am, then, he's getting a different weighting than I'm getting, and we're sitting in the exact same course.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because the only way you could, and so,
It
it's
has
kind
to
of like
start from
with,
9th grade up.
Well, no, but what Dr. Pasi is saying wouldn't necessarily, if you're only comparing kids within a single cohort, then having 2 students in different grades taking the same class with different weights wouldn't necessarily have a negative impact on either student, but technologically, my understanding is that that is currently an impossibility.
Well, it's not an impossibility, it's just, it's difficult, but it's not an impossibility. It creates another, it
Layer of-
creates a layer. You'd have to create a different course. It's much more cumbersome to implement for the school. But the thing I guess the question is, right, so the committee debated this in particular, and they determined that this was consistent in doing it this way, to say that, by implementing it all at a point in time, then we are being consistent. What you're saying is another way of looking at consistency. So again, I think, if the policy is broad, then the interpretation of consistency, I think saying that starting in September, so that kids in the same class who are sitting next to each other are treated the same way, I think that's a view. I think that's a valid view, whether, Doesn't mean the other view is not valid either. The other view is valid as well. But so the committee debated both of these and landed on this one in particular, which is, I think,
But it
I think a
doesn't
fine way to
meet,
look at
it doesn't meet the full definition of consistency.
Well,
And
what
so-
is, what is
certainly-
the, is there a pedagogical downside to having, in the example you gave of the two students from different cohorts being graded on different weighting systems? Pedagogically, from the perspective of those two students, is there a downside?
I don't
to
think the two students would see that as fair. Even though, and I think well, I understand what you're saying in terms of I'm being compared to other students in my cohort. In our hypothetical example, Chris is being compared to other students in his cohort, but we are still sitting through the exact same course at the exact same time. And yet he's getting a higher course weighting than I'm getting. That
Just
doesn't
because of where
feel
But the
right.
course weighting factors into his GPA, not the course average. Like when you see that score on the report card, you're gonna
Yes.
see
Understood.
an A or a B, right? So they're
Understood.
only comparing their final GPAs.
Well, let me ask the question this way to Mara. Do you see any issue with that from a,
So not from a
potential litigation
legal
standpoint.
standpoint, but what I anticipate is you're gonna have a lot of mistakes. In that you're gonna have, because you have cohorts from, everyone, you're your cohort of, and even whether you're behind or ahead of where you're supposed to be, you stay in that same cohort. So if you have a teacher that that now they're looking at this, they're saying this is one cohort, this is another, it'd really be two different ones because there'd be anyone before a certain date, there could be mistakes, so,
Yes.
that's not,
Well, But
That
that's
could
a
always-
student information system
The
thing,
mistake, yeah.
not a teacher-to-teacher
Right.
concern, right?
well, no, but remember, the only way, again, this comes down to the technology.
Yeah.
It's impossible, I wouldn't say impossible, but overly cumbersome, yes.
Yeah.
Overly cumbersome for sure, you'd
yeah,
have
but
to
not,
set up.
I mean, that's not.
So if I'm a teacher and I have kids in different rosters, each of them would be in a different course. As compared to all of them in one course. So if you think about me taking attendance, doing my grades, doing all of those things, right, they're all tied to particular.
It just doesn't become part of a guidance issue, it's an actual teacher issue.
It would be overly cumbersome.
Because the percentage would depend on what cohort you are, so if you were a cohort, so if you say in ninth grade, the new rules are gonna start. So anyone who was in the 10th, 11th, or 12th grade, they would be under the old rules. So,
But if it's a GPA question, isn't that just something that, it's not a student information system thing?
My understanding is that the weighting is tied to the courses. So if you're changing, you'd be creating different schools essentially for each cohort, if you did it that way.
because the computer, I would assume,
Right.
does it itself, like it's
Yes.
not the teacher that says,
For any
Okay.
course that has enrollment in multiple grades that span, the point in time where you change, you'd have to double that course in the student information system, almost creating a math honors,
2025.
math honors 2020 cohort 2026. So that teacher might be a period 3 math course, but there would be 2 separate attendance rosters. You would have to log in and pull up 2 separate classes for your grades, for your attendance. They'd be treated as 2 separate courses.
So every time you had someone who was off grade level, you'd have to create a different section. So if you had a student who was retained into same cohort but retained into a different grade level, you would have to do that. Every time that we ran section numbers to ensure that we were over and under the cap that we talk about all the time, you would have to combine those 2 sections. So it would be essentially running 2 different schools at the same time and have to combine those manually every single time for attendance every day, for grading, for section enrollment, for guidance, enrolling students into a class and making sure it was the correct one, for a course request, for everything, we'd essentially be running 2 separate schools.
For a
Not-
period of 2 years, right?
However long,
Four.
whenever you choose to do it.
because you could start when the
Each
person's in
cohort.
kindergarten.
Start when they come in for
kindergarten,
ninth.
Actually, I mean, even,
You might have to start in eighth.
Eighth.
Because of the courses in eighth grade.
Recognizing how burdensome this could potentially be for teachers, do we have a sense of the scope of the issue, right? Like, so if this is something we're actually considering as a board to understand the cost benefit to implementing a multi-layered burdensome process, like, do we?
But this is why the committee landed where they
Yeah,
landed.
so I have a
So they went through
recommendation.
that
Yeah, the committee
process.
thought the
I
same.
think I have a recommendation, I'm not sure that the people behind me are gonna like this recommendation, or the people in front of me, to be honest, but, I think what I heard today was, I think the board members are on the committee are kind of, we want consistency, we're not really sure exactly, but I think what I'm hearing is that we're not looking to direct, like, regents, no regents, we're not looking to direct the administration, the professionals, you wanna hear what the professionals have to say and let them direct there, that you're gonna do overall, these are the things you wanna consider. The consistency piece, that's not a new thing, I'm not saying maybe it hasn't been implemented the way that maybe people have thought about it. I think we discussed about bringing this kind of to the whole board of, then let me see what their thoughts are and make sure they're also in agreement with this, kind of big picture, this is, what our goal is, and this is where we wanna go. And if they are, I don't know that it would make sense to pause, because you're kind of being guided by the professionals. Yes, they would obviously need to look at it to make sure that, nothing changes with regard to any, looking at a consistency maybe a little bit differently. So to see, I think these changes really affect, you have a little bit of time, so I think that discussion could happen in the next month.
Right.
And then kind of we circle back and see where that discussion went and where the whole board feels, and if we still are in that situation, I think, it's kind of you keep moving forward with what the things were done. And then maybe we could also look into, to think if there's any other ways that we could make it that's not as cumbersome or thing. And I said, the good thing is we have a little bit of time, because the biggest one I think that we're now trapped with, oh no, that doesn't apply this year. Because they change in the percentage, so we have some
Right.
time to discuss more so.
Yes.
And I don't mean at June, in November,
Yes, but-
December,
Correct, similar to the way we would accept the professional's expertise and judgment and recommendation on any particular practice regarding grades or redo or any specific test. Something like that
Yeah,
would be part of
vetted.
that recommendation and would have been vetted. But if it does merit reconsideration in light of any policy changes, that would be up to the PGCD, right?
Well, that's how we would, again, the regulations have to conform with policy. So the way that we develop the regulations is through the PGCD process, committee of teachers and administrators together come up with the recommendations, and they have to conform
Right.
with the policy. So, I didn't view this as not conforming with the policy. That's right.
Right.
So if the policy changes and, and again, there are policies that determine what the weighting is. So if you decide that you want to do that, and you're simply going to adopt these recommendations and put them into the policy, then okay, then we have a process to change them that perhaps, the board's more comfortable with in terms of that going through a policy process. That's another option that we didn't really discuss.
Well, I think we did I think we kind of went into the direction of, I wasn't hearing that we wanted anyone to say, we're gonna do this. Like, we want the professionals making those decisions, not the board. And again, I don't think it's going at anyone's lane by doing it, it's just, I think that what I'm hearing and, my work with you, it's more of, we guide of the philosophy, and then we let the people who do the day-to-day come up with how that philosophy is implemented. And then is the monitoring it, and then it's also, one thing this committee is very good, and then monitoring it to see, okay, well, did the professionals come up with something that does meet the policy?
I know there's another community comment, but I just wanted to say, to me, it's form over substance. If the professionals are determining what the weighting is, Where it goes to me, they're saying policy or in regulation, it's still the professionals determining that as
Yes.
opposed to the board saying,
Yes.
the board says this is what we want it to look like, so I just wanted to say that. To me, the overarching theme here should be do no harm. And that hasn't been discussed as much as consistency, and what I heard from parents, and I don't wanna conflate the curriculum committee part of it, I feel like I'm in a facilities meeting where I'm looking at budget and I'm looking at policy, and I don't wanna talk about budget in a policy meeting. But these overlap, and as a policy matter, what I have heard from parents since June is this not only consistency, but more importantly, do no harm. And I don't mean necessarily do no harm about regents and exams, I mean philosophically,
We don't want any change to do harm to
we
any
don't want
child.
any right, that has to be the overarching, in my opinion, that has to be paramount. And then we as the adults have to figure out a way to make that happen. And I understand there are problems with the information system and bifurcating a class, and I understand all that, but somehow we have to noodle through that. And do no harm is really not prominent in our grading policy right now. And so if I were to change one thing right now, it would be do no harm. I would expedite this through first read to make that happen. I'm just saying in my dream world, and to take that perspective.
We did, however, receive the assurance at the last meeting from Mr. Arini that the policy of implementing this as a sort of time change as opposed to a cohort change would not do harm to students.
That's right.
We did receive, I just want to make clear.
Where colleges were concerned.
Where colleges were concerned, so if we can consider other factors, but I would rely on our administration to bring back the information to us the way we did with requesting the information from Mr. Reedy about college. Are there other aspects of any of these approaches that may or may not be aligned with what's in the current policy or potentially future policy when we get there that would cause harm to students?
Like, we've heard it from so Mr. Arini was saying that colleges will understand the change in the weighting, but they won't be able to tease out the change in the GPA. Because my friend who took this particular course last year got a 0.5 bump, and I'm getting only a 0.3, and no college will be able to go through that minute.
Right, because we don't show it by course, we only show the.
But they're only seeing the kids against their cohort, so we're assuming that the colleges would be applying their thinking to the previous year and saying, oh, well, kids the year before were getting a 95, an A+ in this class, and kids this year are getting an A? Is that what we're?
No, I'm talking about individual students, one against the other, where, and maybe I'm not explaining it properly, but you and I are in the same cohort, we're gonna
Yeah.
graduate at the same time. You take AP, yeah, that's not a good example. You take.
Comp sci.
Comp sci.
Okay.
AP Comp Sci in 10th grade,
Mhm.
okay? We're now in 11th grade. You
I see,
got a
okay.
0.5 bump to yours.
It's a one.
A
You
one.
got a 1 and now you
One
get a
going
0.3.
0.3, which is even more pronounced. And so we're graduating at the same time. Let's say we're competing with each other for whatever GPA, which will, I can't say will, but may likely impact a cutoff for colleges or something. So we are no longer being graded consistently, and we are
Understood.
being harmed. And the colleges will never know, the colleges will know that things change, but they won't be able to tease out, well, Deborah got a 1 point bump up and
Fair.
Jess didn't.
Understood. So I think the question for our administrators, and it doesn't require an answer right now, is how are we as a district going to address that?
Yes.
How will that be addressed? Because that is an unintended consequence of a very well-intentioned and well-thought-out and well-vetted plan.
Right, and it was raised vociferously by parents at the June meeting,
Yeah, and
and I'm still hearing it.
So just going back to the June meeting, it was, obviously very well attended and there's a lot of community engagement then. So I have to just really say I'm so disappointed that we are here now, that this policy got, this grading practice was signed in and was accepted and is being, still a bugaboo for the community because it was very clear at that point that we wanted to wait for our new superintendent and our new director of guidance. But that being said, here we are. So my sense is the board, at the last full board meeting, put this onto the policy committee for the reason of consistency. So now, I guess the plan is to go back to the full board and ask the question, do we want to move forward with consistency? Which is fair. My question is, if we change the policy to allow, I guess, to require consistency, as I guess the policy now says aims for, if it were to say, shall have consistency, what would, like, the nuts and bolts of it, what would the next steps be? So say we were to say, we will be consistent in our grading. Would the next step be then, just like logistically, for the policy to go back to Dr. Passy and central administration to make a regulation consistent with that? Okay.
Yes, do we agree, yes, I think we're nodding, and yes.
To make it consistent with what was already
Policy.
approved by the grading committee?
No,
New policy.
Right,
Yeah.
right, that's a
Like
clarifying
what
point,
would-
like, would the administration then be empowered to make changes to the currently promulgated practice that's, being rolled out in June for the regions? Would that be then reopened for discussion, or would it just be,
It would have to
and
be.
driver have to pick one?
It would have to be, right? It would have to be, because it would no longer align.
Well, so.
Depends what the policy.
It depends on what the
Right.
policy, so if the
Right.
policy, if the policy is with regard to consistency, no regions at all across the board is consistent. It may not be what is wanted by some, but it is consistent. So that aligns with the policy, so therefore it could change. Now, the superintendent could say, you know what, I thought about this again, I spoke with professionals, I spoke with, they came, and we decided we don't really like this policy. We're gonna say, the practice is gonna be 20% or whatever it is, because that still would be aligned with the policy. What couldn't happen would be Dr. Passy saying, you know what, I don't like those middle schoolers, let them suffer and take the regents, and then have them take the regents and count as 20%, and the high school be 100% not counted.
So to answer the question, procedurally, once the policy is adopted, revised policy is adopted, regulations get promulgated, the practices will need to align with the policy. And that may necessitate a change or going back to PGCD, whatever the pathway is, to make sure the practices align with the revised policy. But if the practices are consistent and they will, and also do no harm, because I think that is an important thing to put into the policy, then they may not be changed because they may be in alignment with the policy.
So it would be in the realm of the administration at that point?
At that point, yes.
Yeah, and that's, so traditionally boards, they put the policy of like the overlying feelings and thoughts, and it's the administration that implements them.
Understood.
Yes, which is actually the pathway it took over the summer. The policy was there, we were presented with the information, the practice, and it went through that process. I think,
So, is it my turn? Sorry. So I think the reason why there are so many questions about the process is because we don't have any information about the process. So I'm looking at and I'm not sure, for reasons of consistency, like everything that I don't know how we got here, because the only information that I, as a member of the community, have about PGCD is located in the teachers' union contract. And that document states that PGCD shall be organized as follows. You shall have 1 teacher from each elementary school, 3 from the middle school, 3 from the high school. There shall be alternates appointed if someone is absent. The superintendent shall appoint a max of 6 admins to the committee, and the minutes of the meeting shall be sent to the superintendent and posted in each building. I don't have any minutes. I have the grading committee that made all these grading decisions that we're now following, but middle school teachers were supposed to have been involved, and presumably middle school administrators should have been involved. And I would caution the board to not let your authority be usurped. You are in charge of making policy, and although I fully respect the work of teachers, administrators, I don't want to come off wrong. However, as our elected officials, a healthy amount of questioning and ensuring that all the policies are being followed and that you agree theoretically with the aspect of the specific policies is still very much within your lane. And I don't think that you always have to ask permission to question what is happening, which doesn't seem to be in line with the only policies that I am able to find about this. So I would consider, and you may agree with the policy that's already, that's been recommended by the Schreiber Grading Committee. That's not my point. My point is that there are steps that need to be followed, and as the public, we need to know what those steps are. And I asked at another meeting, and I'm gonna ask again, we would like to see the minutes of the PGCD committee. I don't know what posted in the building means, but I think posted on the intranet would also really work quite well.
Noted. One thing I forgot to mention, we do now by law have a student board of ed member. And that, I'm sorry, I know it's late, but these are important conversations. That voice can't be a potted plant. That voice needs to have meaning, especially I would imagine into something such as this that impacts students. So something I would like Dr. Passy for you to consider is how are we going to best utilize our student board member who is a Schreiber student who has gone through the system here. Best utilize her either on her own or as a gatherer of information from within the building. I don't know to what extent, I know the student council was part of this discussion last year. I don't know to what extent because we don't have minutes appropriately stated. But I think it's very important that we communicate to Dr. Baer that the student board member also should be a part of this discussion. Obviously not during committee meetings, but there needs to be some type of feedback, input at some point from our student board member. I'm sorry, I don't mean to speak out of turn. Do we have agreement here? No. I imagine we're gonna be seeing this on the agenda in November, which is good. Hopefully we'll have maybe some other sample policies in the meantime. I guess unless and until the board directs.
Just to clarify, is the ask that the sample policies be presented to the full board alongside our report from this meeting at our November general meeting?
No,
I think
Or
it's
that, just for.
We do the work here as a committee. It is not a full board committee, so.
Yeah, of course. My question was, as we consider, as we discussed before, we're considering the question of, is our objective as a committee to go down this path of consistency and to review and revise the full policy in that regard?
And where there are other deficits with respect to that. And if there's a desire for specificity, then I think that looking at other policies, I don't know if that will.
In the course of
In
the
the course of
review
that.
in committee.
Yeah.
That's the path.
Right. Okay, so somewhere around here I have our next date, let me just find my agenda.
November 14th.
Thank you very much. November 14th, which I think is back to a Friday. I hope the conference was well, by the way, I hope the NISBA conference was wonderful, and I thank everybody for changing the date to today. And we will see you back here on the 14th. Yes?
Thank you.
Thank you.